Let's talk about how to overcome your fear of making mistakes. And you're going to find out in this video that fear of making mistakes is actually about something deeper. And I'm going to share with you exactly what that is in a moment. We all struggle with a fear of making mistakes. And what's really interesting about overcoming this fear is that there's plenty that we can do about it. And the first thing is to really understand the nature of the fear of making mistakes. Where does this fear come from? And so I found that generally most fears fall into two categories. The fear of making mistakes falls into either an emotional fear or a physical fear. So the fear of making mistakes most often is really an emotional fear. And what it boils down to when you start to pull away all the layers of socialization and learning from the time we were a child, generally it comes from a fear of rejection. A fear that if we make a mistake, somehow it will lead to rejection. For an example, if you're someone who has to get up on a stage and give a speech, and there's a huge fear of making a mistake in the speech, a big part of that is probably a fear of being rejected by the audience. Now, generally, emotional fears of being rejected are coming from our childhood. Actually, most fears that we face are deeply, deeply seated. They're unconscious. They're not something that we have a whole lot of control over. And if you've ever had a panic attack or ever felt your heart start to race without being able to control it, you know that the body has a physiological response to fear. Your sympathetic nervous system kicks in and gets you into fight, flight, or freeze mode, whether that fear is emotional or physical. And so a lot of times the fear of making mistakes is really tied to an emotional fear of losing something or not belonging anymore. See, as human beings, we evolved around other human beings, and it was really important for our survival to belong to the tribe. In fact, we lived in tribes for hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, way longer than we've lived in societies or cities or towns. And in fact, all of those social constructs or ways of living are really only from the last 10,000 years or so. It came along with basically the agricultural revolution. So we're not going to dive into that, although it's a really interesting topic. But back to this idea of fear of these emotional fears that can make us fear making mistakes. In those old days, in those hundreds of thousands of years that we were evolving in tribes, it was very important for us to belong and to be accepted by the tribe. If you imagine if you did something wrong and you were rejected by the tribe, you could be banished from the tribe and you'd be left to your own devices, left on your own. And that was basically certain death, because human beings evolved with these social connections to support and take care of each other. So one lone human by him or herself in the forest was likely not going to survive very long at all. So now you can start to see how this emotional fear of not belonging, of being rejected, can come along with a very almost physical, visceral feel of not being able to survive. Now, this is all happening often totally subconsciously, deep, deep in our unconscious mind, but the fact is, it is happening. Other emotional fears are fears of losing status. And again, that's pretty much related to this fear of not belonging, of being rejected. Most of these emotional fears, at least most of the ones that I can think of that come along in this context of how to overcome the fear of making mistakes, come back to the single fear of being rejected. The second fear is a fear of physical harm or pain. As humans, we are vulnerable physically, right? Our skin can be pierced, we can get sick, there are things that can break our bones, there are things in the physical world that can hurt us. It's very adaptive, it's a very natural and normal response for us to have a fear of something that could physically hurt us. Now, generally, fear of making mistake in the context of, say, work or business is more tied to an emotional fear. But fear of making mistake in, say, skiing or riding a bicycle can bring a very real fear of physical pain and harm. And so in both of these cases, if you really feel like your fear is maladaptive, or it's getting in your way, or it's above and beyond what you think should be normal, then there are a few things that you can do to overcome this fear of making mistakes. By the way, there are 5 F's. If you know me, you know I love alliteration. So the first F is reframe the fear. Right now, if in the current model that we were just discussing, fear is a bad thing, and the fear of making mistakes is a bad thing because we feel like we might get rejected or we might get hurt. But if you reframe the fear of making mistakes as something else, then it's the first step towards moving through that fear. So think about the fear of making mistakes. Let's reframe it as something positive. So making mistakes, if you reframe it as something positive, is really just learning. Now imagine a little kid. Imagine at what age do kids start walking? Maybe 1 year old, 14 months old, something like that. Now imagine if a little kid is crawling and stands up for the first time and takes his or her first few steps and falls down on the ground. And the mother comes rushing over and scoops that little kid up and says, "Don't you worry, honey. I'm never going to let you make another mistake again. I'm never going to let you fall again." Now, if that mother did that, and if that kid thought that making mistakes, aka falling, was a bad thing, that child would never learn to walk. Really, making mistakes is a very human way of trial and error and learning how to do things better and developing new skills. So if we can reframe the fear of making mistakes, instead of being something negative, instead of being something that's going to subject us to pain or harm, and instead of making it something that's going to cause us to not belong and to be rejected, if instead we can reframe the fear of making mistakes, instead reframe making mistakes as something positive. Making mistakes is something necessary. It's something we have to do in order to develop new skills, in order to expand and grow. And if we start to relate to mistakes instead of as this bad thing, and start to reframe our relationship to making mistakes as something not only positive, but necessary for growth and expansion, then we can start to train ourselves to make more mistakes and not be so freaked out by them. The second thing we do, and this is going to be really different from what a lot of people talk about. I certainly didn't learn this in my family or in my school. The second thing we can do is really feel it. Feel the fear. Actually put your hands on your chest and close your eyes and breathe in to the fear, and really cultivate the feeling of fear. Allow it. Accept it, acknowledge it, receive it. We spend so much of our time trying to avoid or distract ourselves from the things we're afraid of because we don't want to feel that emotion. That's really what we're avoiding, is the emotion that goes along with the mistake or with the fear. So if you actually just say, all right, I'm going in, I'm going to feel it, I'm going to have this experience, you'll be amazed at how quickly you feel that fear, and then just breathe, and you'll start to see that the fear starts to subside. And if you do that again and again and again, what you can do is you can activate through breathing, slow breathing, you can activate your parasympathetic nervous system. And actually the example I gave there was wrong, because what you want to do is breathe in through your nose and out through your nose. When we breathe out through our mouth, we're activating our sympathetic nervous system. So when you want to calm down, you want to make sure that you're breathing in and out through your nose. That's associated with calming behavior as opposed with to fight or flight or active behavior. So just a little trick, feel the fear, feel into it, breathe into it, in through the nose, out through the nose, until you feel that it starts to dissipate. And then just tell yourself as you're doing it, I am safe. I am safe. It's all good. Just keep telling yourself that you are safe, and your body will soon start to get the message that this fear that you're so afraid of isn't anything to be afraid of at all. The third thing that you can do is pay attention to where you're placing your focus. Now, a lot of times in life, there are these two kind of opposite things, the thing that we don't want and the thing that we do want. But pay attention, because very often we are focusing on the things we don't want. In other words, I work with a lot of clients who are building out their new business models and they're creating new possibilities for their life. And I'll ask them, all right, what do you want to do with your life? What do you want? How do you want your life to be? What kind of business do you want to create? Let's just get excited and dream. And they'll immediately go into, well, I don't want to work 9 to 5. I don't want to have to work on weekends, or I don't want to travel for work. So they'll immediately, I'll ask them to paint the picture of their ideal company, and boom, they go straight into what the things they don't want are. Now, it's really good to know the things you don't want. Absolutely fundamental, very important to know what you're saying no to. The thing is that once we've decided what we want to say no to, what we want to refocus our attention on is what we're saying yes to. So we're saying no to the no's, but if we're saying no to the thing and we're focusing on the thing that we're saying no to, that means we're not focusing on the thing that we're saying yes to. So you'll find in your language a lot of times if you're using the word no, or I don't want, or I can't, all these negatives, right? Consider reframing toward the positive. When it comes to a fear of making mistakes, if we're focusing on what we don't want, I don't want to mess this up, I can't make this mistake, I can't afford to lose, then we're going to be vibing. And if you want to watch my other videos about, how to attract everything you want in your life, I have a video that you can click on right there. Then we're vibing with the negative. We're vibing with the things that we are not wanting to create instead of with the things that we do want to create. So when you find yourself saying, I can't make a mistake, I don't want to, instead say what you do want. I want to shine. I want to excel. I want to hit this out of the park. Like, create something compelling for you emotionally that you can focus on so that you can create more of that. The fourth thing that I'm going to invite you and encourage you to do is to face your fears. In other words, practice making mistakes. Face the fear of making mistakes by practicing on purpose making mistakes. Now, if there's an area of your life like public speaking where you're deathly afraid of making mistakes, then don't choose that one to practice on. Choose something that's not high stakes. Choose a low stakes area of your life where you can practice making mistakes, and then practice making mistakes over here, and that's cross-contextual. You can bring that skill set back to this other area that's really freaking you out. And the final thing that you can do in order to overcome this fear of making mistakes is to see any failure, any mistake that you make as feedback and find the lesson. Feedback, find the lesson. So find the lesson for everything that goes wrong. Immediately look at, if this were a gift, if there were a gift in this mistake, in this problem, in this challenge, what would it be? And start training yourself to find the feedback in every situation where you normally would think it was a failure or a mistake or a problem. Those are my strategies for overcoming the fear of making mistakes. If you like this video, then you're gonna love my Monetize Your Magic playbook. You can get that for free below, and what that's going to do is help you align your business and your career with who you really are, what you really want, so that you can enjoy yourself and have more freedom, fortune, fulfillment, and fun. Enjoy.